Welcome to the latest episode of Techman Talks Dynamics. This week it's back with the CRM and Power Platform team. So my name's Jason. I lead the CRM and Power Platform business at Techman, and I'm joined today by some of the CRM Power Platform colleagues. So I've got Zach, Ellie and John with me, and we are going to be talking about specifically the Power Platform today. And so much so that all of us, not so long ago, in June, went to what's called the European Power Platform Conference, which is the main Power Platform conference in Europe. I've just reworded the name of it. That Microsoft helped sponsor, lots of kind of activity, and over 2,000 attendees this time round. I was lucky enough to go last year as well, and it's kind of doubled in size in the space of 12 months, which kind of emphasises the level of interest and the level of activity with the Power Platform that we have today. So I'm going to kick off with kind of my key kind of summaries of kind of some stats that I took away, which was we had 2,000 attendees at the conference in Brussels over 3 days, and the key highlights for me was just the sheer volume of the platform it is already now. And I think it's something like in one of the keynotes, could it be slightly corrected, but about 330,000 organisations worldwide are utilising the Power Platform in some shape or form, and that's only ever growing. And Microsoft also talked around about the potential of the Power Platform. Now, we have our first-party tools, our CRMs, our Business Centrals that are out there, and they're business applications that people can turn on and configure and tailor. But then, obviously, the Power Platform allows us to create from scratch. And one of the stats that Microsoft brought to the table and put on a slide at the keynote was 1 billion new apps will be built by 2028. And of course, that's not going to all be the Power Platform. That's going to be across every technology that's out there. But that just shows the sheer possibility and potential that the Power Platform has. So where do we want to start? What areas do we want to start as a key takeaway? Do we want to start with Power Automate, Power Pages? Who's got one to start off with?
Well, I'll go then with Power Automate.
Yep.
I did a few sessions on that because Power Automate has become the backbone of the sort of processes that we do within Techman.
Yep.
I don't think there's any projects we do that do not have some element of Power Automate that's there, and that has replaced the workflows. One of the key takeaways from me is that I am very guilty of finding a way that I know works and just implementing it again and again and again because I know it works without ever really looking at whether it's the most efficient way of working. We were both in the same session, weren't we?
Yeah.
With
Damien Bird.
With Damien Bird. And he was talking about using expressions within Power Automate.
Yeah.
And I've started really implementing those. Looking at ones I've recently done on projects I'm currently working on. Can I improve things?
Yeah.
And yeah, it does mean you have less steps. Previously, where I would have a list and apply to each, an if and then an action, I can get that down from just a list and an action using expressions. So I can tend to find that what was 4 steps is now down to 2. The efficiencies that you have are not fantastic per flow. You may be talking a second, maybe less than that. But if it's something that's run many, many, many times during the day, where users are waiting and there could be multiple records at any one time, those efficiencies are going to start to add up. And if you're doing that across all the flows across the business, it will start to mean that Power Automate starts to become just that little bit faster. Okay. So it's really just getting expressions used more often. It does make the flows much, much more efficient. And by using it, there's actually a problem that I'd had since January or February, which I'd spoken to a couple of consultants here about that I hadn't been able to solve. I've now solved it. It's in place, it's working. So it's just by having expressions, it's actually removed the complete need for a child flow as well. So it's added more efficiencies. It's made the system just that bit leaner.
So in terms of if I was sitting here listening to this as a customer then, and I say, right, I can build I can use this thing as such called expressions in Power Automate, the benefit for us, what we're delivering to our customers, or our customers even building some flows themselves, is in the overall estate, is not only potentially is the level of steps as such in their flows a little bit shorter, in terms of maybe it's easier to read, but ultimately with a number of flows, and depends on if those flows are constantly on a schedule, repeated several times a day, etc., then whilst you're not going to change the world and drop it perhaps by 50% efficiency, improve it by 50% efficiency, it is still going to improve the overall state of efficiency of flows for our customers as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It's just all around that, just the simple apply to each. Yeah. There's so many times where you build a Power Automate workflow and the apply to each just gets created, and just understanding, you can make this a lot quicker by avoiding the apply to each, which is just getting automatically applied.
Just because it's there, you don't have to use it.
Yeah.
Specifically, if you've got a list rows action, but you're actually trying to just retrieve one value, obviously you don't need an apply to each because you are just retrieving one record. So using an expression means that you no longer need to use the apply to each.
And for those that are on this, that are listening to this podcast, that are trying to find out a little bit more about the Power Platform and Power Automate, if you had to kind of summarise what apply to each actually means in kind of a few words, how would somebody understand what apply to each actually means?
Apply to each is that if you put a query that's going to return a variable number of records.
Yep.
So in most cases, you would in a
Many
lot of
results.
cases, as he said, you would expect there'll be one record returned.
Yep.
But because the list could return a differing number, the system does not know how many records it's going to be.
Yep.
So you have to say for that, work on every single record.
Yep.
Even though we only expect there's going to be one. And in fact, on some of them, on a lot of the ones that I do, I have the apply to each. I will then do an if statement, and if the length of those records equals 1, I continue. So I know that way there's 1, and I can then also say, well, if there's 0 or 2 or more, something's gone wrong, and I can then trap it. And so if you send it down that route is 1, you know there's going to be 1 record, and then the expressions can start to come in. But yes, it's because you're used to something where it doesn't know how many records it's going to get.
Find.
Yeah. It's basically just looping through all the items, trying to find them all out.
Yeah. So again, it's making it, ultimately, I think the summary is it's helping make it more efficient.
Yeah. And faster as well. So
Yeah.
Like you said in the one of the sessions that you attended, they had a sort of timer for two separate flows, one using the expressions and one not using the expressions. And the one using the expressions ran a lot quicker than
Yeah.
than
I
the
mean,
other
obviously,
one.
the MVP did it at, Damien did it at, he obviously really hammed up the example, but the one side was I think it was 1 minute 30 something, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And the other side was less than a second.
Yeah.
Because it was doing a lot of reformatting of the data. So I don't necessarily think that's something we're going to be doing here, but it certainly shows the potential that you need to think about what you're doing, because there can be inefficiencies. And actually, one of the examples he quoted was for a customer, wasn't it? That was it a 2-hour flow that he got to run in about, was it a few seconds when he'd done it? So
dramatically reduced the time of the runtime.
Yeah. So I think, but I think there is a don't expect expressions are going to fix every potential.
No.
Why a flow runs slow either. It's just another aid, that it's another part of the toolbox that allows you to build something more efficient.
Yeah. It's more just, if you see an apply to each, question yourself.
Think twice.
Do you need this?
Yeah. Fair enough. Anything else on Power Automate before we move on?
I'll mention it later when I talk about something else, because it can be included in it, but Power Automate specifically, no. I think just from my perspective, I think just using expressions a bit more is something that I'm going to try and do.
Okay. So, Power Apps, anything on Power Apps that anybody wants to highlight and mention? I know a few of you sat in kind of some Power App sessions, and I know someone has the word containers stuck in their head as well more recently, but anything that anyone wants to mention about Power Apps and the key highlights?
So I think obviously the Power Apps, one thing that was drilled in was obviously the word containers.
What's a container?
So containers, basically it's a container, various different expressions and things within the Power App itself. It was really interesting to sit in the Power App sessions and just watch, people that are real experts in the field. I think this is just worth mentioning, just in general, across the Power Platform, you've got Power Apps, Power Automate, marketing, etc., etc. There's so many different things that people are experts in, and being there at the conference, really sort of drills home the level of expertise you can get to. So yeah, I think just in general, the Power App session was just really intriguing, just to see, some of the expressions, which we might get onto again later if we start talking about Power FX.
Yeah.
Some of the expressions you can do with the Power Apps, they're just great.
I think the bit for me about Power Apps that was a takeaway is that, one, there's more focus going into the design now these days.
Yeah.
Obviously, I have a bit of a thing about kind of what they look like, but there is definitely more capability, options now. People have spent time out there kind of focusing on how they make them look better in terms of Canvas apps specifically, and also what they can do. And also we can take a lot of that back in terms of we've created ourselves some very functional Power Apps, but perhaps we can also make them also look really good as well. It's not that they look poor, it's the case of they're functional, but we can make them look good now. And we're obviously creating that little bit of a toolkit, a framework again for Power Apps that makes it easier for us to design them moving forward as well. So I think the ability that those have enhanced themselves a lot over recent times, and just the use cases that Power Apps are out there now, I think more people are experimenting, and not just experimenting, ripping off other systems as such. They are truly looking at going, well, what are my gaps in my Excel sheets, my Access databases, my piece of paper, and yes, I've got a back-end database in the Dataverse, but what am I fronting it with as such like that? And Power Apps are starting to become a big play. And obviously we're in the middle of rebuilding our visitor system, for example. We've built our own Power App for our Power Platform catalogue, so people can see what we are doing across the business to help grow that area as well. So I think for me, the use cases and people exploring about exactly what you can make your apps look like these days is a big one for me that came from the conference.
Yeah.
Sorry. Something else that came up as well in one of the Power App sessions was Copilot in Power Apps.
Yep.
So obviously, if you're new to building Power Apps, you'll find that it's quite easy to just drag and drop components onto the Canvas app. That's the easy part of it, and making it look nice. But what can be difficult is actually getting that app to do what you want it to do,
Yep.
to get to navigate to the different screens and, actually do what you want it to do. And obviously we use Power FX to do that. And if you're completely new to Power Apps, you're going to look at Power FX and think, what do I even do? So you can now use Copilot to help you write those Power FX expressions.
Yep.
So you can actually sort of explain what you want that particular button to do, for example, and then Copilot can actually write that Power FX expression for you.
Yeah. No, yeah, definitely. I agree. I think the biggest takeaway for me with the whole Power Apps thing was around expressions, and that, it's okay dragging and dropping your elements and making it look good. But if you know Power FX expressions, clearly, and you've got that experience,
Yep.
the actual time to create a Power App is very quick.
Yeah.
So it was just a reinforcement again of just the importance of knowing Power FX.
And I think with those expressions, actually what you can do is that people talk about Canvas apps as a pretty front end. Actually, those expressions and just the general technology with Power Apps actually can make Power Apps actually quite functional as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Power Pages.
Yeah, so
We've sat on a few Power Pages sessions over in the conference.
Yeah, I think obviously Power Pages, we've had our own internal project, and we went there fully loaded with questions for the people presenting, the poor people presenting, as we sent them a load of questions after each Power Pages session we sat on.
Yeah, we did.
We did hear from the one person from Microsoft, I believe, who did a Power Pages session, that external API connections is something that's on the roadmap.
Yeah.
We didn't get a specific date, but I know that obviously a lot of people that work with Power Pages, the ability to connect to an external API is something that everyone is crying for, I think, at this point. Same with rich text. Obviously, the rich text controls which have been introduced into the Power Pages, they're absolutely brilliant, but there are still limitations at the moment with regards to rich text being displayed on the timeline. I'd probably say one of the good things that I took away was the whole favicon Favicon.
Favicon, yeah. Favicon.
That we've now added to our own portals after, you know, essentially we didn't have them on there before.
So what's a favicon, Zach? What's a favicon? Because most people are going to go, huh? What?
Let's take me back to the 90s, that is. I remember those.
It's the small little icon that you'll see if you open up, if you basically on a browser and you open something up, and it's a little icon that lets you know that, hey, this is a TechMan portal, for example. So it's the icon for a business, so it's not just a blank page. You know, it's a very small design branding thing.
Yep.
But, you know, it does make a big difference, I think, to the ones that we've built now.
Yeah.
And just simple things like that, you know, again, the most important tips, I think, at some of these things are the most simple and obvious ones that you can take away and run with.
I think that's fair. I think there's a lot of things you take from a conference, and actually some of the small snippets end up being some of the most powerful ones that you bring back. I think for me, Copilot chatting in websites, Copilot in Power Pages is obviously a big one as well that they're talking about. So the ability for not just you to help build that website with Copilot, but obviously bring that Copilot into the website that you can query what's on that website essentially. So not just being a chat system that links back to CRM, but you can kind of use Copilot to interrogate what's inside of that portal, for example.
Yeah, the whole Copilot and Visual Studio is obviously a massive thing which has come into Power Pages recently. And, you know, even myself, who's not a complete CSS wizard, have used Copilot in Visual Studio Code in Power Pages, and it has worked.
Yeah.
So, you know, that is going to be a big help for people that aren't necessarily, you know, developers.
Yeah.
Adding, you know, little incremental changes to their portals.
The big one for me on Power Pages is portals. So if you're using a portal for like submitting cases or submitting evidence or submitting information, one of the biggest challenges you've got right now is the file sizes.
Yes.
That you can only submit a file up to something like 256 meg or 128 or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's small. If you've got large files, you're stuffed, is the best way of describing it. If you're trying to submit lots of images and screenshots to help with a support issue, that's easily going to grow to like 7 meg, 8 meg, 10 meg or more. There is now on the roadmap, Microsoft have acknowledged it, and there is not a release date, but the large file support, and they're going to do it up to 1 gig. So to be able to take that back into Dataverse or against your case record and stuff like that. So obviously reality is we'll put those in SharePoint if it's linking to CRM customer service cases, but that's a big step forward for Microsoft in my mind, and that's going to help not only just us at TechMan with kind of our customers and our kind of support cases that you can do through the portal, but it's just going to help generically across everybody else that uses Power Pages as well. I think the key thing for me as well is that Microsoft re-emphasised at the event that Power Pages is not an e-commerce system. It's a website that can be collateral, it can be for forms, and it can be for a portal. So whether it's customer, supplier, other type of relationships, but it's not. It's not there to compete with Shopify, Wix, WooCommerce. It's not there to compete with those type of tools. Okay. What do we want to do next? Because Copilot and Copilot Studio clearly we've mentioned it already, is one topic that we probably definitely need to mention. Is there anything, before we move on to Copilot and Copilot Studio, is there anything anybody else wants to highlight?
Just that Ellie and Zach mentioned PowerFX.
Yep.
I sat in a few sessions on this because previously I'd had a little play with it, just adding it to a button and adding an expression to do some calculations, which worked.
Yep.
Obviously it's something that's using Canvas apps a lot, so
yep.
that's fine on the very, very few Canvas apps that I've got involved with. But the fact that the calculated fields are now being replaced by formulas which have PowerFX embedding underneath them. So again, I've started removing some calculated fields. Well, not so much removing, but trying to replicate the calculated fields with PowerFX, having them both on the screen at the same time. Do we get the same result?
Yeah.
And for everything so far, yes. So it's using the latest technology to do that. Because where the calculated fields are going to be removed, I don't know. I mean, they've been in since, was it 2013? And if you've got an installation that uses a lot of them and it's embedded in your process, you've got to go and change all of this. So I don't think Microsoft are going to get rid of them, but it might be like the legacy workflows where they're just going to get slowly pushed out to the side.
Yeah.
But yeah, so PowerFX is used for that. The idea of having the PowerFX plugins, so instead of having to have a C# developer write your code, you can do it in a PowerFX plugin and then deploy that to your system to sort of replace the sync workflows is another area. But I think PowerFX is one of those things that we're going to see more and more of.
So to those that are kind of listening to this, how would we best describe what PowerFX is? Because people hear a lot around Power Pages, Power Apps, Power Automate, the tools, etc., that the front end of the people want. But obviously, PowerFX is more of a under the hood. This is helping all of those tools kind of be more functional and give me a better experience. But is it a set of logic? Is it a coding language? What is, to those that are kind of listening and you're hearing the words PowerFX for the first time, what is PowerFX?
It's defined as low code. So it's a bit like how Excel expressions work.
Okay.
So it's not, you don't actually need to be a developer and have any coding skills to be able to use PowerFX, but it's still something that you would need to learn before using it, I would say.
It's essentially the language of Power, the Power platform, basically. It's a language for Power Apps, Power Automate, everywhere. Annoyingly, PowerFX is, the language, but it does actually slightly differ in Power Apps and Power Automate.
Depends on what you use.
Depending where you are, but essentially, that's what it is. It's the language for the Power Platform.
It's a way of creating formulas.
Yeah, it's basically
I was going to say
formulaic language, but
that's
the backbone of the Power Automate and Power Apps that you create.
I guess it's intended to be simpler than using code.
Yeah. But is it? Because, again, I know you're not a developer, you're not developers, so that's a hard question for you to answer. But I suppose my point was, is it easy?
I think it's reasonably straightforward, because at the moment the only tools that we've got are calculated fields, which are very limited in their scope.
Yeah.
You've got business rules, which are, I'd argue, even more limited in their scope. PowerFX does give you that ability to start writing something as you want it, to be able to start bringing things in, look at related tables. So it does give much more scope for what you can do.
Yeah.
And it's nice that they've sort of settled, because, as I say, we've had JavaScript for as long as I can remember. We've got business rules, calculated fields, workflows, lots of different technologies. Now it's all been pushed down the PowerFX route. I think that's going to be the language they've picked. And just again, tying that into Power Automate with these low-code plugins, you can actually write a sort of plugin/action, which you can then refer to in Power Automate. So you can actually call a bound or an unbound action depending on whether it's there. So if you want to run a much more efficient action from within Power Automate, you can start to do that too. So it's clear that Microsoft have decided that PowerFX is going to be the language that's going to underpin the Power Platform for everything you want to do. And as Ellie says, it's similar to Excel. So it's not something you need a developer for. You can start to pick something up. As you write it, it does do IntelliSense, so it suggests what you want to do. I tried writing one this morning where I'd used the wrong type of field and it said you need to convert this field. So it does actually give you hints as to what you're doing wrong if you have done something wrong, which is nice.
And that is where some of the BC code, for example, has gone to. It's hinting, and as you write it gives you suggestion. So I think, in a way, in my opinion, it's close to code in terms of the way that you do it. But in another way, it's not. You haven't got to get a copy of Visual Studio out, for example, and start writing it there, package it up. You are building your PowerFX logic inside of make.powerapps, putting it inside of a solution, you put it there. You're not getting the developer to separately write something to then put it into a solution as a web resource or whatever it is that they need to put it inside of the system for. So I think it is easier and different and gives us more scope in the toolkit, I guess, in my opinion. But I think the only thing is that it's easier for consultants and technical consultants and super users, but it's still, in my opinion, it's still not something that you're going to pass out to every, if you want to call it, citizen developer or end user out in an organisation, that they're just going to start doing it, because I don't think it's that either.
No.
Okay. So, final couple then. Copilot Studio. Anyone want to talk about Copilot Studio?
So I think when you hear the word Copilot or even just AI in general, I think it scares a lot of people because they think, is this going to take my job? Is this going to take my job? And, yeah. So one thing that was really reinforced in one of the sessions that I attended was the fact that it is a co-pilot. It's meant to help and assist you rather than completely take over what you do. So an example that the speaker used was a car dealership in America.
Yeah.
So they had a chatbot on their website, and essentially, in a nutshell, somebody used that chatbot, a customer or prospective customer, and they managed to negotiate with the chatbot to get a Chevrolet down to $1. So obviously, that just proves that Copilot is not meant to take away a salesperson's job in this example. So the guy used a concept called conversational orchestration, which is essentially knowing where to build in generative AI in your chatbots, and then also knowing when you want your chatbot to call an action. So for example, in that scenario, they probably would have wanted their chatbot to create a lead for the salesperson to pick up, follow up. So yeah, it just shows really that it's not meant to take people's jobs, it's just meant to assist people and support, and
So I think obviously Copilot, what we've seen inside of our tools already, inside of CRM, sales, customer services, marketing, as I keep bringing the data to the service for me to help me kind of scenario help me interrogate my data in my system, my processes. Inside of Business Central, it's starting to become very similar in terms of give me information, bring it to the surface, opposed to me clicking lots of buttons. Power Platform underneath, helping me build, assisting me in my build. Obviously, the Copilot Studio is trying to say, well, how do people interact and ask more of kind of not bringing it to the service, and when you've got different sources available, so websites or other tools or different parts of the system that standard Microsoft Dynamics Copilot or Microsoft Copilot don't look at. And obviously, the Copilot Studio is allowing you to build those. So I think the biggest things that I took from is like your knowledge and your actions and your triggers that you've got from there, and to build your own Copilot to say, I want my Copilot. I'm not going to the principle of generative AI is I'm not going to pre-build every question and answer. It's going to look at the information that's available to me, and then it's going to allow whoever is asking the question, that Copilot is going to respond in natural language to have a common conversation like you were talking to a human. And the reality is that you've got to get to a point where your knowledge and what your sources are is there, but you've got to also influence it. You've then got to put your kind of actions in, your triggers in of what actually you want it to do. And where are the boundaries, as you say, potentially buying a Chevrolet car for $1 is clearly that those triggers and those actions, they weren't there. They weren't there enough to say, yeah, we're stopping here. Your negotiation stops now. This needs to be referred to somebody back in the office, or back at the dealership, for example. So I think from my perspective, Copilot Studio, it's a Copilot we've started to see in all our lives in Microsoft and Dynamics. I think now the world of possibility of customers having their own Copilots that are specific to them, I think there's a world of opportunity there. So allowing somebody to query your back-end Business Central system for stock, where's my order? And all of a sudden, opposed to trying to replicate different data into different databases, is using APIs and stuff like that and connections to be able to say, I can just go look at that, and within these parameters, give these answers back. And then Copilot does it themselves. And I think that's where there's going to be a lot of trial and error to start off with. I think there's going to be you're probably not going to throw it out there and go, Copilot's now going to give me everything I want on its own because I've give it the rough boundaries. There you go. There's the boundaries. I don't need to do any more. That's clearly not the case, and that's never going to be the case. But I do think Copilot Studio is that it's only a matter of time until our customers at Techman, or generically as well, they're going to be asking for, can I have a Copilot that does? Not, can I have a Power Portal that does? Can I have a CRM system that does? Can I have an ERP system that does? Can I have a Copilot that does? And all of a sudden build that out, package it up and then that's what they use. And then they extend it, or then they create the next one that they want. They want to create one around suppliers. They want to create one around customers. They want to create one around that item creation process. there's a world of possibility out there with Copilot Studio, and the key thing is working through natural language and not having to build those question and answers every single time. I think from my perspective, if there's one big thing that just, in a polite way, they didn't let up on throughout that whole conference, it was Copilot Studio. But Microsoft did acknowledge, if you talk about kind of the curve of kind of innovation and release and stuff like that, obviously you got the early adopters where we're always early adopters. We always show early adopters. We're always telling our customers going, we're gonna give this a go. It's the right thing to do. They've even acknowledged that Power Platform is prior to the early adopter stage as it stands right now. They're at the innovation stage. It's still evolving. It's not even at early adopter stage. So the stats that I used at the start of how many organisations are using it, I'm sure I saw somewhere that in terms of Power Automate, users, individuals worldwide, I could end up getting corrected, and please don't hold me to this, those that are listening, but I'm sure I saw somewhere it was like 45 million active monthly users of Power Automate around the world. And we're still at innovator stage. We're not even at early adopter stage yet. So this platform is here to stay. And whether you're a Business Central user, a CRM user, or not yet either of both, the Power Platform itself has a play for all of you, is my opinion. So, anything else that you want to highlight or mention?
I mean, I can be boring and mention governance.
I think governance is something that we're going to do more on moving forward. I think.
So that was another one that was just, I guess, an important one to just be wary of around the governance around, management of credentials. There's various different platforms that you can manage those now with Azure Key Vault, for example.
Yeah.
Other things, not specifically governance, but around solutions and patches. It was interesting that someone said at the conference that essentially patches, although it's not officially deprecated, in the end they will be phased out of solutions. I think really those were the two other add-ons I'd say that were worth mentioning from my point of view anyway.
I think in terms of patches, I think that will just change that you're not it's getting to a level opposed to you seeing when you've got a fix or a change to a system, opposed to it being a patch, it's pointing to the solution so you don't see as many kind of layers in kind of your back end. So that's more from a super user system point of view. The end user won't have any concern. It makes no difference to them. I think the governance bit, I think as this platform, based on what I just said about innovation, not even early adopter, I was going to use the word as it's starting to mature, but I think I can even say the word mature yet. But as it's starting to evolve again and again and again and get bigger and more structure, I think governance is becoming more of a focus from Microsoft as well. Opposed to I've got lots of people doing lots of things in this platform, and how do I manage it better? And I think that's important even for our customers at Techman, is that how do we manage it better when you've got lots of environments, lots of solutions? What can you and can't you connect to? What's the rules that you put in place? And I think over the next kind of 6 to 12 months, you're going to see Techman talk a lot more about kind of governance and policy and stuff like that, of what we also need to put in place, not just for now, but that creates a structure for the future as well.
Yeah.
And the only other takeaway I've got is JavaScript. I've used JavaScript since I started in CRM back in CRM 3 and 4. It made a change in 2011, and it was that session that we were in. Essentially, they'd said that the code you had in 2011, essentially, with 95% of it would still work now.
Yeah.
And I was always wary about using JavaScript because you think at some point this is going to get turned off, but I don't think it is. No. I think scripting is something that
if it's done for the right reason, it's fine.
Yeah. But it's one of those that if you have a system that's got a combination of, let's say, business rules and calculated fields and JavaScript, it could start to get confusing. If you know the system is going to be using scripting, have everything in one place. So that from a support point of view, you're not looking in all sorts of different places for everything. We do it in one place. So I'm gonna embrace my scripting again.
Okay. I think as in short, do you all agree it was a worthwhile few days?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
I think from our point of view, we try and do these. We've got another one that's more focused on Business Central and Power Platform that the business attend later in the year. I think this is we've got the ability that we can then take this back and implement it in our customers, utilise it, use it how colleagues can also take advantage of it as well. So I think from our point of view, we'll look forward to next year's. But I think it just, more than anything, it emphasised that the Power Platform is massive.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that in any kind of corny, kind of jokey way in terms of someone I'm saying, oh, it's massive. I think the reality is that the potential of the platform, I think we all knew it was big. We all have seen it, how it grows, etc. I think the fact of just the latest conference, the doubling size of the numbers, the actual numbers of the tool that's in use, I think if customers aren't using the Power Platform, I think my only comment is, well, why aren't you using the Power Platform?
Yeah, there are so many different, areas of the platform, like I mentioned earlier, apps, automate. Going to the conference makes you realise that no one in the world knows everything about the Power Platform, and no one in the world is ever going to know
Even
it.
Microsoft. I didn't say that.
It's so massive that, it's great though, because there's so much scope and things to learn. You'll never be in this line of work thinking, I know it all.
Yeah.
There's always going to be something new. I guess that's what makes the whole industry exciting.
Cool. Okay, we'll wrap it up there. So, thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you.
We had a full house in the room for Power Platform podcast. So, thank you very much for taking the time to watch and listen to the latest episode of Techman Talks Dynamics, and hopefully you'll see us talking more about the Power Platform again soon.